Hi Rowan and Ryan, Marines, sailors and soldiers, airmen and even coasties. Hey, tonight I'm going to read out of James Bradley's Flags of Our Father. I like this book a lot. It's not a first-hand account. James Bradley was the son of one of the guys that raised the flag on Iwo Jima. And he writes a pretty good book. He does an incredible amount of research, and it's really well written, so I like it a lot. This passage that I'm going to read is not about Iwo Jima. It's about Tarawa, and in this passage it doesn't make clear. I don't think that these 6 guys that raised the flag are on Tarawa. They might be. I don't know. I wasn't paying that much attention. I just wanted to read this section because it tells about how the Marines are trained and what they're able to do because of their training. It's an amazing story. Here we go. I'm going to pick it up right here. It was a battle on a tiny atoll of Tarawa in the Central Pacific that would foreshadow the fate of Mike, Harlan, Franklin, Ira, Wren, and Doc. And those are the 6 guys. And all the Marines fighting the America's War. Tarawa is a tiny 1 square mile spit of sand, only 800 yards wide. And it was in the Central Pacific in the Gilbert Island group, north of Bougainville in the Solomons. So it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's like 2,400 miles away from Hawaii. Tarawa represented the kickoff of Howling Mad Smith's, that's the general Howling Mad Smith, Central Pacific thrust on the road to Tokyo. The dramatic opening of the second front in the war against Japan. This was a new theater of sand, coral, and volcanic rock that left the jungles of the South Pacific far behind, so it's a different kind of island. The Central Pacific campaign was unlike the battles of the South Pacific. The Japanese had heavily fortified these island outposts. To capture them, Marines would have to mount offensive thrusts into the teeth of armed and waiting enemy. So they were, and it's not like they weren't waiting for them before, but they were well dug in, well fortified here. The photographs show that they have coconut log reinforced concrete for pillboxes. In 1943, there were reasonable military officers in the Pacific who expressed serious doubt whether any fortified island could ever be assaulted by an amphibious force. These men honestly believed heavily barricaded enemy atolls in the Central Pacific would prove to be the brutal ground of any American force foolish enough to leap off the deep end. Howling Mad Smith was not among those officers. He knew he was attempting the toughest of all military operations, a landing, if possible, in the face of an enemy machine guns that can mow men down by the hundreds. He knew that the battle would be costly in Marines' lives. The Japanese boasted that Tarawa could never be taken in 1,000 years, so they were pretty frickin' confident that they were going to hold that island. But Smith was confident his Marines would succeed, and you'll see. Huge Navy gunships hit Tarawa with the greatest concentration of arterial bombing and naval gunfire in the history of warfare up to that point. So they smoked it. He promised he would obliterate the island. But when the first 3 assault waves of Marines stormed ashore on the morning of November 20th, 1943, they realized the Navy bombardment had been ineffective and only rearranged the sand. Not sounding good. Japanese gunfire ripped through the ranks. Confusion reigned. The Marines pinned down on shore were in desperate need of reinforcements. 2 waves of landing boats full of troops, tanks, and artillery were on their way. Then disaster struck. The landing boats hit an exposed reef 500 yards from the shore and were grounded. 500 yards. That's more than a quarter a mile out. They hit a reef and they were stuck there at low tide. It would be 44 years before physicist Donald Olson would discover that the D-Day on Tarawa occurred during one of the only 2 days in 1943 when the moon's apogee coincided with the nape tide. Now the moon's apogee is when it's the furthest away, so it has the least effect on the tides. And the apogee, the nape tide is when it's the smallest distance between high tide and low tide. So a nape tide is like the smallest difference in tide. And it took them 44 years to figure it out. It was piss poor planning. Those guys fucked up. The actions of these Marines trapped on the reef would determine the outcome of the battle for Tarawa. If they hesitated or turned back, their buddies ashore would be decimated. So they were going in to reinforce their guys already on the beach. Some guys already made it. But they didn't hesitate, and this is the part that I like so much. You guys are awesome. They didn't hesitate. They were Marines. They jumped from their stranded landing craft into the chest-deep water, holding their arms and ammunition above their head. So they're up to here in water, holding their shit above their head. And this is the part that I like. Another part that I like. In one of the bravest scenes in the history of warfare, these Marines slogged through deep water into sheets of machine gun bullets. There was nowhere to hide, as the Japanese gunners raked the Marines at will. And the Marines, almost wholly submerged and their hands full of equipment, could not defend themselves. But they kept coming. Bullets ripped through their ranks, sending flesh and blood flying as screams pierced the air. Japanese steel killed over 300 Marines in those long minutes as they struggled to the shore. 300 Marines in minutes. They were mowing them down, and they kept coming. As the survivors stumbled breathlessly onto the shore, their boots splashing in water that had turned bright red with blood. This type of determination and valor among individual Marines overcame seemingly impossible odds, and in the 3 days of hellish fighting, Tarawa was captured. The Marines suffered a shocking 4,400 casualties in just 72 hours of fighting, and they wiped out an entire Japanese garrison of 5,000. That's the kind of story that I want my boys to know about. I want them to know that there were men that did that, and you guys represent those same guys. You're cut from the same cloth, and it makes me really proud to think that my son is a Marine. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe and tell your buddies that I'm reading this stuff so that they can get an understanding. They can see how proud the heritage is, what men fought for and died for. I'm proud of you guys.